Ding dong, mother scratches. Happy weekend, rookies. This video is going to focus on the online assignment. It is going to be due Wednesday at 2:30. I do want to clarify what the assignment is going to be about and get you guys on the right path. So first of all, we're going to be talking about human rights this week. And this is in connection to our main lesson for the upcoming week called the Enlightenment. And I know we haven't really talked about the Enlightenment. We haven't talked about Enlightenment thinkers. And we haven't really talked about human rights. So if you're wondering to yourself, like, what are human rights? I'm going to break it down for you. Some of you know what human rights are. You get it. You know what I'm talking about. Some of you are kind of confuzzled. So for starters, we're going to watch a 2-minute video on human rights. And that video is really going to help you guys understand what we mean when we say human rights. So, video is coming up.
Human rights. What are human rights? Well, human rights are the values which keep society fair, just and equal. They protect children, the elderly, people in care, victims of domestic violence, people with mental health problems, religious groups, teachers, soldiers, and yes, prisoners. They protect all of us. They protect you. Our human rights are protected by law. That means we can do something if our rights are attacked. But not everyone loves human rights. Some want to water them down, even scrap them. Our rights are under threat, so it's time to get educated. Societies used to be controlled by all-powerful rulers who could be horribly unjust. Kings only gave rights to people they liked. Over thousands of years, people fought for equality, and with every hard-won right came new laws that improved how we lived. But in the 20th century, brutal dictators came to power. They ruled by fear, like the kings of the past. Those hard-won rights, they were dismantled on an unimaginable scale. After World War II, the democracies got together and said, never again. They created a simple document setting out the basic rights we all need to live a dignified life. The European Convention puts rights, not rulers, at the heart of our society. Like the right to life, to liberty, to free speech. Then, in 1998, Parliament passed the Human Rights Act, which made our human rights part of UK law. This means public bodies like hospitals and schools must respect our rights, and if they don't, we can go to our local court to enforce them. Now, because of human rights, patients in hospitals must be treated with compassion. Journalists cannot be forced to reveal their sources. Soldiers must be given proper equipment. Gay people have to be treated equally, and the police cannot keep our DNA forever if we're innocent. We have to be treated fairly, at work, at home, in school, anywhere, everywhere. Our human rights are hard-won. They're part of our British heritage. We are proud of them. If we lose them, vulnerable people will pay the biggest price. Know your rights. Celebrate them. Protect them. Share this video if you think human rights matter.
Okay, there we go. Human rights. So I'm going to just kind of repeat what the narrator was talking about there because he was British and had an accent, and maybe he was talking a little bit too fast. Maybe you missed some of it. But to simplify it, human rights are just rights that all humans are born with. And no government and no person can take those rights away from you. In the video, he mentioned certain rights such as freedom of speech. He mentioned life, liberty. He mentioned the right to worship the way you want to worship, or maybe not worship. Freedom of movement. These are all rights that each individual has on earth, and it doesn't matter if you're a prisoner, it doesn't matter if you're a child, it doesn't matter your race, your religion, your ethnic background. These apply to all humans all over the world. Okay, so what we're doing is we're kind of making a connection to the Enlightenment. And if you recall last week, we talked about a time in Europe where all of the power was in the hands of one man, and that man was a king, an absolute monarch. The majority of the population were poor, common people known as peasants, and they had no rights. The only rights they had was what the king determined and the church. And of course, we talked about the church and how the church tortured and imprisoned people who disagreed with their teachings. Okay, so this week, we're going to learn how the Enlightenment comes along, and these Enlightenment thinkers, man, they are not going to take it anymore. They're going to stand up to the church. They're going to stand up to the king. They're going to fight for rights of all humans. And we're going to talk about those ideas and how those ideas really have made an impact on our own society today. So your assignment this week online is to do the following. You're going to go to the internet. You're going to research a current event article. I'm suggesting you look at a reputable source. Remember, we talked about sources, trustworthy, incredible sources. So BBC is great. NPR is great. PBS has a website. CNN to an extent. We want to make sure that we're not going to look up something that's biased one way or the other. We want something that is going to be trustworthy and credible. So once we find that article dealing with a social justice issue, we're going to kind of analyze what's going on. So when we say social justice issue, we're going back to those human rights. So I want to know an issue currently, whether it's in the United States of America or North Korea or China or Saudi Arabia, somewhere around the world where the government is violating people's human rights. It could be that women aren't allowed to drive. They can't have a driver's license because they're a woman. It could be illegal immigrants being separated from their families. It could be transgender people not being allowed to openly express who they are. It could be racial profiling of police officers stopping drivers simply because of the color of their skin. Okay, so these are all examples of people's human rights being violated. A historical example that you probably know of might be Nazi Germany during the 30s and 40s. The Nazis were a political party led by Adolf Hitler, and their focus was to place European Jews in concentration camps, and eventually they began executing millions of them across Europe simply for their religious beliefs and their ethnic identity. So once you find that article dealing with that social justice issue, that human rights violation we just talked about, you're going to summarize the article, tell me what exactly is happening, how is the government violating these people's rights? Okay, that's the first thing that you do. Tell me the problem. Tell me how the government's going after a certain group of people and what they're doing to violate those rights. Step number 2, you're going to write a paragraph explaining which Enlightenment thinker would be most concerned with the current social justice issue and why. You want to make sure to explain the Enlightenment thinker's ideas, and if the Enlightenment thinker were alive today, what actions or changes might he or she call for? And lastly, I want you to try to find a quotation from that thinker that would best apply to this current situation. Be specific as you can and include details. So I know that we have not talked about Enlightenment thinkers. Module 12, Lesson 2, you might want to refer to that, skim over that lesson. This week, we're going to go over a chart, and I'm going to break down all the Enlightenment thinkers and their ideas for you. But if we were doing this lesson focusing, let's say, on Nazi Germany and the Jews, I would choose this guy right here, and his name is Voltaire. You're going to learn about him this week, and I name dropped him, I think, the first day of class. But one of his ideas was something called religious tolerance. And he strongly believed, now he came up during the age of absolutism and he saw what the church was doing. He saw how the kings were treating people who had different religious ideas. And he saw people being tortured and imprisoned because of heresy. And he said, you know what? I don't care if you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, pagan. I don't care if you're an atheist. You should have the freedom to practice whatever religion you wish to practice or not to practice. But no government should punish you because of your beliefs, your religious beliefs. And one of his most famous quotes is the following, quote, "Nothing is more dangerous than ignorance and intolerance armed with power," end quote. So he's talking about people being intolerant towards their other religious groups, and how powerful people, the kings and the church, can really do a lot of harm to people who don't want to play ball. All right, so I have Voltaire, I have the quote, and then if Voltaire were alive today, or if, let's say, he were alive during the 1930s and 40s when all this stuff was going down in Europe and Hitler was throwing Jews in concentration camps, I know for a fact my boy Voltaire would have spoken up. He probably would have led marches. He would have wrote newspaper articles. He would have called for an immediate stop to the persecution of Jews by the Nazis. And he probably would have been willing to go into a concentration camp or maybe even be executed for those beliefs that he so strongly adhered to. So that's what Voltaire would have done based on his ideas. Okay? All right, so once I've done all that, I've got my human rights violation. I talked about the problem. I went back and I found an Enlightenment thinker and their ideas that kind of connects to that problem. And I just kind of like suggest what they would have done to solve the problem, or at least call attention to the problem. Now I'm done. But the last thing I have to do is I have to cite where I got my information from. So in my example, I used, the Nazis in their treatment of the Jews. So this may seem confusing to you. We're going to be using APA throughout the year. I will go over it step by step in class. Don't freak out if you don't exactly get this straight, but I would like you to at least try to follow the format, and you should cite where you're getting the information. No Wikipedia, please. You know that. Okay, so what you need to have is the author's last name, first name, in parentheses, the date that the article was published, the article title, and then retrieved from, and then copy and paste the URL into that spot right there. So my example, you can see here, it says, if you can't find the name of the author, provide the name of the website. There was no author for my source. So I used the title of the website, which was United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. In parentheses, I put the date. They updated that date currently, 2018. The title of the article is Introduction to the Holocaust, and then I put retrieved from, and that is the entire URL for the website. So if you make a couple mistakes on this, again, no worries. We'll get into it later on in the school year. Okay, rookies, so this is due Wednesday, 2:30. The Dropbox is already opened for this assignment. If you have a question, you can shoot me an email. But remember, human rights, those are things that all people have a right to. Life, liberty, property, education, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom to worship how you want to worship, freedom to choose your own gender identity. We're talking 21st century stuff here. So you want to research, again, look up an article that's going to call attention to a government currently that's trying to strip people of their human rights, and then connect an Enlightenment thinker to that human rights violation. I hope this helps. If you have a question, shoot me an email. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday or Tuesday. Ding dong, mother scratches.